The battlefield lay in ruins beneath a sky roiling with ash and embers, the air heavy with the metallic tang of spilled blood and the acrid stench of smoldering wood. Siren alarms long since died, leaving only the moan of collapsed banners and the distant crackle of dying fires. Amid the fractured ranks of her once proud legion stood Kalara, queen of the Hollow Claw, her sapphire-streaked fur matted with sweat and gore. Every muscle in her lithe, feline frame tensed as she surveyed the wreckage. Broken siege engines, shattered shields, and the limp forms of comrades half buried in cratered earth. Her crystal blue eyes, fierce as frozen lightning, flicked from one fallen banner to the next, seeking any spark of life. Though exhaustion threatened to drag her to her knees, she refused to yield. For in this carnage lay the seed of something more profound than victory or defeat. With each ragged breath, she vowed to find its purpose, even if it meant embracing the madness that drove her people. She flexed her claws, the runic etchings along her gauntlets glimmering faintly in the flickering torchlight. These were not mere weapons, but living extensions of her spirit, forged in the heart of a dying star and tempered by the blood-sweat pact of her ancestors. As the last sentinel fell silent, a hush descended over the field, as though the land itself awaited her next move. Drawing herself to her full, imposing height, Kalara let the weight of her crown, a circlet of obsidian claws bound by starlight filaments, settle more firmly upon her brow. The hush deepened into an expectant stillness that thrummed in her veins. Somewhere within the rubble she sensed a stir of consciousness, an echo of will that had not yet surrendered to death. She stepped forward, each hoof-clad footfall sending tremors through the shattered earth, determined to unearth that final spark. At the crest of a crater rim, she discovered him. A lone figure in battered armor, chest heaving and sword arm trembling. Where lesser queens might have seen an enemy or a corpse, Kalara saw instead an ally cast adrift in the sea of ruin. Beneath soot-streaked helmet and steel-reinforced garb, the human's eyes glittered with defiance and pain. He raised his blade, in a fleeting gesture of defiance, as if to ward off some unseen ghost. But the momentum of Kalara's approach carried the tension away. In that moment, the alien pulse of her own madness, born of centuries spent slaying to stave off a void beyond reckoning, clashed against the raw human will to survive. She halted, weapon poised, and found her own heartbeat echoing his. Then, with a motion as swift as moonlight's kiss, she lowered her blade, offering no mercy but no death either. Only the unspoken question of, "Why are you still standing?" The human, Commander Alara Voss, Kalara would later learn, stared back with equal measures of awe and confusion. His wounds were grave, a deep slash across his torso, arrows sprouting like dark flowers from his ribs. Yet he stood, a testament to resilience or sheer lunacy. Kalara reached out, talons glinting, and pressed her gauntleted hand to his chest. He flinched, bracing for pain, but instead felt a pulse of warmth that surged into him, the ancient lifeblood magic of the Hollow Claw. Around them the wind stilled, and the dying fires dimmed, as though even the elements deferred to her will. She spoke a single word in the Weaver tongue, "Rise," and felt the weight of her madness transmute into fierce compassion. With a groan, Alara sank to one knee, then lowered his sword in surrender as though entrusting his fate to her. Beneath the ashen sky, Kalara helped him stand, wrapping his damaged arm in living runes that glowed with healing light. Each stitch and glyph burned away ragged flesh and bone splinters, knitting his wounds with threads of cosmic stardust. Alara's breath came in ragged gasps, eyes wide with bewilderment. "Why do you save me?" he rasped, voice thick with pain and mistrust. She studied him, this human so unlike her own kin, yet bound by the same desperate yearning to stave off annihilation. "Because," she replied. "Madness is a burden shared, and in unity we forge our salvation." Her words were both a promise and a challenge, echoing through the carcass of war around them. They moved through the shattered corpses side by side, Kalara guiding Alara with steady resolve as he leaned on her armored flank. The cratered earth gave way to trenches that yawned like hungry maws, each filled with fractured remnants of enemy and ally alike. Where grief's howl might have rent lesser hearts, Kalara felt only a solemn determination to mend what had been sundered. Every fallen warrior she passed was a note missing from the grand symphony of life, and she, its unwilling conductor, must reclaim the melody. Alara followed wordlessly, his trust in her tempered by his own exhaustion, each step simmering with the potential for redemption or ruin. At the heart of the battlefield lay the shattered war shrine, a once proud monument to deities of blood and moonlight, now cracked and charred, its altars dented by siege engines and its carvings obscured by ash. Kalara paused at its entrance, lifting a claw to trace the serpent sun's sigil, her people's emblem of balance between creation and oblivion. Hot embers drifted across its broken surface, and as she stepped forward, the runes in her armor flared to life, resonating with the shrine's ancient magic. Alara watched, awe replacing pain, as she placed a single gauntlet upon the cracked marble and spoke in the tongue of stars, an incantation older than memory itself. Light flared around her crown, cascading down her shoulders in rivulets of living starlight. The shrine's hearth, long cold, ignited in a rush of flame that burned without consuming, as though fueled by pure will. Kalara's voice rose in a chant that wove together madness and mercy, her tone both war cry and lament. Each syllable calligraphed tendrils of healing fire that snaked out across the battlefield, searing the wounds of fighters and foes alike, mending torn flesh and fractured spirit. The armies, once locked in mortal combat, stilled, as though hypnotized by the Queen's song, and the boundaries between friend and enemy blurred in the glow of her cosmic mercy. Alara, steadied by newfound healing, lifted his gaze to the heavens where ash-veiled stars trembled in the storm-scarred sky. He realized that Kalara's madness was not a curse, but a crucible. Through its heat, compassion, and destruction were fused into a force capable of reshaping worlds. He stepped forward, placing both hands beside hers on the altar, and felt the searing warmth of her song flood into him. Their combined wills sparked a resonance that pulsed outward, binding broken armor and shattered steel, coaxing fallen warriors to their feet and filling them with the will to live. Across the field, cries of pain turned to gasps of relief, and enemies laid down arms to tend each other's wounds. When the final echo of her chant faded, Kalara lowered her head, wings of woven starlight folding like mournful petals. The shrine stood renewed, a beacon of hope amid death, and Alara knelt beside her, awe and respect shining in his gaze. "You are the madness that saves us," he whispered, voice reverent. She met his eyes, the feral edge softened by compassion. "Madness alone is a blade without purpose," she replied. "But guided by mercy, it becomes the sword that defends life." In that moment, a fragile truce settled over the battlefield, a promise that war's end need not birth silence, but a symphony of renewal. As dawn's pale light cut through the silvered clouds, Kalara lifted her crown and placed it upon Alara's head. The starlight filaments glowed brighter, forging a bond between queen and commander. "Rise, star-wrought chosen," she intoned. "Together we bind the madness and shield the world from the void." Alara's breath caught as he felt the weight of her legacy settle upon him, an honor and a burden inseparable. Yet beneath his battered armor, his heart thrummed with resolve. Side by side, they led the survivors of both armies back toward the broken gates of Kalara's citadel, a fortress of moonstone and obsidian perched on a cliff that overlooked the war-scarred plains. Each step rang with newfound purpose. Heal the land, rebuild the peace, and confront the darkness that had driven their peoples to the brink. The survivors gazed upon their queen and her human champion with a mix of wonder and hope, for in their union lay the promise that the battlefield would weep no more. Their procession came upon a group of children, survivors of the war's ravages, huddled amid the ruins of a collapsed keep. Kalara knelt, her cobalt gaze softening as she extended a clawed hand. Alara knelt beside her, offering a bundle of healing herbs they had gathered from the shrine's sanctified embers. Together they tended cuts and bruises, using the magic of her madness and the gentleness of his humanity. Laughter, fragile but genuine, rose among the children, echoing across the ruins and weaving new threads into the tapestry of life. Kalara rose, brushing mud from her armor with a slow, regal grace. Her gaze swept the horizon, where storm clouds churned with unspent fury. Yet here, in the heart of ruin, the first buds of renewal unfurled. She turned to Alara, who now walked with steady stride and unwavering purpose. The void beyond these gates still hungers, she reminded him, voice soft as starlight. But together, we shall turn its hunger into symphony. At the citadel gates, 2 banners flew, one bearing the serpent sun of the hollow claw, the other the white star of Alara's Order of the Silver Dawn. They fluttered side by side in a breeze scented with fresh hope. The gates creaked open, revealing halls hung with tapestries of past glories and failures. Within, healers and smiths labored to restore armor and mending wounds, their efforts illuminated by the shrine's distant glow. In the grand audience chamber, a vast hall of vaulted ceilings and moonlit columns, Kalara and Alara stood before, the assembled council of warlords and priests. The air buzzed with tension as they recounted the miracle at the shrine. Skepticism warred with wonder, yet when Kalara extended an invitation to forge a new era built on shared sacrifice, hardened, hearts softened. Alara echoed her words, speaking of unity born of compassion, and their combined presence rendered dissent powerless. A hush fell as the high priest of the Silver Dawn stepped forward, placing a jeweled chalice before the queen and commander. "By this covenant," he proclaimed, "we bind our fates and pledge our peoples to peace." Kalara dipped her blade's tip into the chalice, and Alara followed, each drop of blood falling in solemn vow. The chalice glowed, pouring incandescent light into the chamber that banished shadows and doubt alike. As the council raised their own blades and spilled blood into the chalice, a wave of energized magic rippled outward, sealing the covenant in living power. Kalara felt the surge in her veins, a fierce joy mingled with relief that her madness, once a manifestation of war's desperation, was now the keystone of peace. Beside her, Alara's smile was triumphant yet humble, for he knew the road ahead would demand more than ritual. That evening, atop the citadel's battlements, Kalara and Alara watched the moon crest over the horizon, its silvery light bathing the war-scarred plains in quiet beauty. They stood in companionable silence, each pondering the dawn of a new age. When at last Kalara spoke, her voice was soft but unwavering. "The void still stirs beyond our walls, but with you by my side, I fear no darkness." Alara nodded, placing his hand over hers. "And I, no madness." In the depth of night, the battlefield lay silent no more. Where once only the dead and dying remained, now rose the murmur of rebuilding, a symphony of hammers on anvils, laughter of children, and prayers whispered beneath healing flames. And at its heart stood a feline queen and her human champion, bound by blood, madness, and a shared promise, that the world would weep no more under their watch. Dawn's first pale light crept across the citadel's ramparts, illuminating the long lines of artisans, healers, and soldiers who toiled within its walls. Kaelara and Alara stood side by side atop the highest tower, surveying the flurry of determined activity below. Blacksmiths hammering fresh plates of moonsteel, scribes copying treaties by torchlight, and squads of recruits training in synchronized drills. Each sight and sound filled Kaelara's heart with fierce pride. This was the living manifestation of the covenant they had forged. She nudged Alara's shoulder, offering him a rare, playful grin that softened her feline features. "Our madness has become their purpose," she murmured, voice edged with wonder. He looked at her, admiration and affection gleaming in his human eyes. "And their hope," he added, squeezing her hand. Their moment of quiet was broken by a distant alarm, a single bell tolling from the city gates. Kaelara's ears flattened, instincts flaring. Alara's hand went to the hilt of his sword. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Peace was fragile, and vigilance must never waver. Racing down the spiral stair, they emerged into the courtyard where the city guard was forming ranks at the sound of the bell. A messenger, breathless and mud-streaked, knelt before them. "Sire, Commander," he gasped. "Refugees from the borderlands. They say the void spawns stir once more and entire villages vanish overnight." Kaelara's jaw tightened. The void spawn, creatures of shadow born from the emptiness beyond reality, had been driven back by the shrine's light, but never fully destroyed. Their resurgence now threatened to shatter the fragile peace at its root. Alara stepped forward, voice calm but resolute. "Gather every spare blade and shield. Send aid to the border fort at once. I will ride with the vanguard." Kaelara placed a hand on his shoulder, concern softening her fierce gaze. "And I will accompany you, no risk too great." Together they rallied the guard, their combined presence igniting courage in every heart. Mounted on her great midnight steed, its coal-black mane braided with starlight filaments, Kaelara led the vanguard out through the city gate, Alara at her flank atop a griffin-like war beast. Behind them, the procession of wagons laden with healing supplies and reinforcements wound through the newly rebuilt streets, citizens cheering their queen and her champion. As they passed under the gleaming arches of the gate, the banners of Hollow Claw and Silver Dawn fluttered in the breeze like twin witnesses to their unity. The road to the border fort lay through pine-dark forests and scarred farmlands. Bandits and beasts alike lurked in the gloom, but none dared challenge the Voss-led host. Along the way, Kaelara and Alara dismounted to aid a column of wounded refugees, mothers cradling trembling children, elders leaning on gnarled canes, and farmers clutching scorched seed sacks. Kaelara bent to soothe a frightened child, her deep purr resonating like a lullaby. Alara knelt by an old woman, binding her bleeding arm and offering a reassuring smile. Each small act of mercy after the horrors of war stoked the fires of hope they sought to spread. On the third night, they arrived at the border fort, a crumbling stronghold perched on a wind-swept plateau. Torches flickered in broken towers, and the walls bore scorch marks from the recent void spawn raids. From the ramparts, soldiers shouted warnings as shapes blurred in the darkness, shadowy hulks with glowing red eyes. Kaelara's wings unfurled, catching moonlight as she leapt into the fray, blade singing starlight with each sweep. Alara followed, gauntlet blazing with rune fire. Together they fought back the tide, their presence a living bulwark against the encroaching horror. The battle raged through the night, void spawn howls mingling with the clash of steel and the snap of arcane bolts. Kalara moved with predatory grace, every strike precise yet fierce, tearing shadows apart and filling their absence with healing light. Alara covered her flank, channeling the song mist through his gauntlet to reinforce the battered walls and restore fallen soldiers in a wash of gentle warmth. At dawn's return, the last void spawn collapsed into motes of dissipating darkness, banished once more by the power of their combined resolve. Exhausted but unbowed, Kalara and Alara convened with the fort's commander, an aging captain named Yalen, within the shattered Great Hall. Yalen's face bore the weariness of 30 years of service, yet his eyes shone with respect as he saluted. "Your Majesty, Commander, we owe our lives to you," he said, voice trembling. Kalara inclined her head. "The Covenant demands we stand together," she replied. Alara placed a hand on Yalen's shoulder. "And we will not abandon those who stand with us." They promised to reinforce the fort permanently and to patrol the region until the void spawn threat was extinguished for good. As they departed the next morning, Kalara cast a glance back at the embattled stronghold, its repaired banners now billowing in the breeze. A pang of solemn pride tugged at her heart. This outpost, barely more than a husk when they arrived, now stood as a beacon of resilience. She nudged Alara's steed forward. "The void spawn will return," she warned, "but so will we." He nodded, resolute. Together they would guard the borders against every shadow that dared to return. Weeks passed in a whirlwind of duties, inspections of frontier watchtowers, councils with neighboring lords, and ceremonies honoring the fallen. Kalara's regal bearing and battle-scarred presence inspired loyalty beyond measure, while Alara's steady counsel and compassionate deeds earned him the love of common folk and nobility alike. Yet amidst the rulership and war preparations, they found stolen moments of intimacy, rides under star-spangled skies, shared meals by campfires where they spoke of home, and quiet confessions of the burdens they carried. One night, under a sky streaked with shooting stars, Kalara led Alara to a hidden glade deep within the royal gardens. There, she revealed a moonlit pool whose waters shimmered like quicksilver. "This is the mirror of souls," she explained. "It reflects not who we are, but who we must become." Alara gazed into the waters and saw their intertwined fates. Two figures standing firm against an endless void, their blades crossed in unbreakable bond. He turned to her, hand reaching for hers. "Then we must become the light that never fades," he vowed. Kailara's purr of approval resonated like soft thunder. Their vow was tested the following dawn when messengers arrived bearing grim news. The void spawn threat was a symptom of a deeper rift, a tear in the fabric of reality centered beneath the ruined city of Blackspire. Legends told of a void forge there, an ancient engine that birthed the Shadow Horde. If left unchecked, the rift would widen, spilling darkness across the world. With solemn determination, Kalara and Alara assembled an expedition, mages to seal, cracks engineers to dismantle the forge, and warriors to hold back the voidspawn horde. They set out at first light, the expedition forming at their heels like a river of steel and magic. The journey to Blackspire led them through the Ember Marsh, a land of molten bogs and sulphurous fumes where no ordinary path existed. Kalara's keen senses guided them along hidden causeways, while Alara's wards kept the noxious vapors at bay. At night, campfires glowed between the marsh's crimson reeds, and Kalara stood watch, her silhouette a dark sentinel against plumes of steam. Alara joined her just before dawn, and together they watched the first light chase shadows across the marsh, tempering its unnatural glow. Emerging from the Ember Marsh, they beheld Blackspire's spire, its blackened pinnacle looming like a claw reaching for the heavens. The city below lay in ruins, streets choked with ash and bone, its towers' jagged stumps silhouetted against a blood-red sky. From the apex of the Void Forge, a pall of darkness pulsed, breathing despair into every corner. The expedition halted at the city's edge, Alara dismounted, boots crunching on ash. "This is our crucible," he murmured. Kalara's gaze hardened, with resolve. "Then let us temper the rift with our bond." They infiltrated the city through ancient catacombs, passages lined with bones that whispered the prayers of the dead. Kalara's claws carved a swift path ahead, Alara's wards, flaring to reveal hidden traps and collapsing walls. Each step took them closer to the heart of the Void Forge, but also deeper into danger, as the air itself seemed to coalesce into shadowy phantoms that lunged from every corner. The expedition's mages formed a protective ring, chanting spells of banishment, while the engineers set runic charges at structural weak points. In the forge's central chamber, they found the Void Rift, a roiling maw of inky darkness suspended above a dais of twisted metal. Tendrils of shadow snaked forth, ensnaring hapless soldiers and dragging them screaming into oblivion. Kalara and Alara charged in unison. She cleaved the nearest tendril with star-forged steel, while he unleashed the combined shards of the celestial chorus, runes of binding light that sizzled through the void-spawn ranks. The engineers detonated their charges, collapsing pillars of obsidian crystal that choked the rift's edges, but the abyss resisted, pulsing stronger. Realizing brute force alone would not quell the tear, Kalara leapt onto the dais and pressed, her gauntlet etched with every rune of her people against the rift's edge. Alara followed, channeling his healing song mist to counteract the rift's corrosive energy. Together they wove a counter-harmony of starlight and compassion that resonated within the abyss. The Void Forge trembled as its dark music clashed. With their symphony, and for a moment, time itself stuttered. With a final synchronized chord, a roaring blend of Kalara's purring chant and Alara's resonant hymn, the rift collapsed inward, imploding in a blinding flash that shook the city's very foundations. Shadows screamed as they were drawn back into the void, and the pall lifted from the sky, revealing dawn's golden rays for the first time in countless seasons. The Void Forge's twisted gears melted into harmless ash, and the city's ruins stood silent witness to the power of unity over oblivion. When the light faded, Kalara and Alara staggered back, breathless and spent, atop the shattered dais. Around them, the surviving expedition members knelt in awe, their wounds sealed by the afterglow of the battle. Kalara's fur was singed and Alara's armor scored, but their eyes met with unspoken triumph. "The rift is sealed," she announced, voice quivering with relief. Alara drew her into an embrace, his arms a sanctuary amid the razed city. "And the void spawn's reign is ended," he whispered. As they led the expedition home through Blackspire's empty streets, the first seeds of renewal took root. Moss sprouted in cracks of obsidian walkways, and from the forge's molten embers rose delicate flowers of starlight. Kalara and Alara rode in silent reverence through the transformed ruins, each step echoing with promise. By the time they emerged into open fields, the sky above was clear, and the world, scarred yet unbroken, stretched before them, ready for the healing to begin. Their return to the citadel was heralded by banners of victory streaming through. The gates, the streets alive with cheers and tears of relief. Citizens lined the thoroughfares, reaching out to touch the armored hooves of Kalara's steed and the griffin mount of Alara's banner. Children ran alongside the procession, tossing petals of stardust blossoms that hearkened to the shrine's first bloom. Kalara dipped her head in regal acknowledgement, while Alara lifted his sword in salute. Every face in the crowd, whether human, feline, or other alien kin, reflected a single, shared truth. Darkness had been overcome by unity. In the grand plaza before the citadel steps, the Council of Realms had assembled to welcome their queen and her champion home. Lined in resplendent robes and cerulean armor, delegates from distant worlds bowed as Kylara dismounted. Alara followed, offering her his arm as they ascended the dais together. The High Chancellor, a robed figure whose crystalline staff shimmered with diplomatic power, stepped forward to address the assembled crowd. "By the valor of Queen Kylara and Commander Alara Voss," he proclaimed, "the Void's threat has been vanquished, and a new era of peace dawns for all realms." Echoing chants of "Harmony! Harmony!" rose from the masses, echoing off marble pillars into the sky. Yet even as celebration reigned, Kylara found her gaze drifting to the horizon, where distant storm clouds gathered like silent prophets. She placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, voice soft but firm. "Our work begins anew," she reminded him. "The rift may be closed, but scars remain." Alara nodded, eyes reflecting the glow of the setting suns. "Then we shall heal the Yi wounds together." They shared a determined glance that conveyed more than words ever could. Their bond had grown from alliance into something deeper, forged in battle and tempered by shared compassion. Over the following weeks, they toured the rebuilding efforts across war-torn provinces. In the Ashlands, where the Void Forge once stood, engineers labored to transform the ruins into a sanctuary of learning, erecting the Academy of Harmonic Arts, where students would study the symphony that saved the galaxy. Kylara presided over the laying of the cornerstone, a crystalline block imbued with the combined runes of Hollow Claw and Silver Dawn, while Alara addressed the gathered young apprentices, his voice warm with encouragement. As they spoke in unison, their words wove a bridge between past suffering and future promise. In the reclaimed forests of Lysandra, she and Alara planted the first saplings of the Stardust Grove, trees whose blossoms radiated healing light at night. Elder druids blessed each planting, their chants overlapping in melodic counterpoint. Kylara traced the runes on each trunk with a tender caress, whispering compassion into the wood's core, while Alara scattered seeds of hope at their roots. The grove's first blooms glowed softly as dusk fell, sending ripples of restoration through the soil and air. Travelers passing by paused in awe, feeling burdens lighten in the grove's embrace. Yet politics proved as complex as any battlefield. Factions resistant to change stirred dissent in distant city-states where old rivalries had lingered. Whispers of broken oaths and fear of Kylara's madness threatened to unravel the fragile unity. Alara convened peace talks in the Citadel Council chamber, a circular hall ringed with stained glass depicting the symphony's key moments. Kylara stood beside him, silent sentinel, her presence lending weight to his words as he appealed to reason and shared sacrifice. Hours of debate gave way to cautious agreement, and the chamber's stained glass bathed them in a mosaic of color, a reminder that harmony arose from many voices. In the quiet hours before dawn, Kylara and Alara met in the royal aviary, a vaulted garden filled with songbirds whose melodies echoed the chorus's strains. She watched them flit between luminescent branches, and he placed a hand on her arm. "We have done much," he said, voice thick with pride and fatigue. She leaned into him, eyes still taking in the delicate dawn light. "And yet the greatest song is the one we compose every day," she replied. Their shared smile was a vow to continue composing that song, no matter the discord they might face. One evening, scouts returned with an urgent report. A drifting star reef, a dangerous region where cosmic currents pulled vessels into oblivion, had started to brighten with void corruption. Though minor compared to the previous rift, its growth threatened vital trade routes. Alara turned to Kylara, resolve flashing in his eyes. "We ride at first light," She nodded, summoning her mantle of starlight. Then let us chart a new harmony among the stars. They set out aboard the Aurora's Grace, Kalara's flagship carved from moonstone and ether crystal, its hull inscribed with the runes of safe passage. The Council's envoy accompanied them, diplomats, mages, and engineers determined to prevent another catastrophe. As the ship leapt into hyperspace, Kalara stood at the helm, her cobalt gaze fixed on Star Reef's projected coordinates. Alara joined her, hand resting on her gauntlet. "Together," he said softly. She smiled, wings of starlight unfurling behind her. Always together. They set out at first light, the expedition forming at their heels like a river of steel and magic. The journey to Blackspire led them through the Ember Marsh, a land of molten bogs and sulphurous fumes where no ordinary path existed. Kaalara's keen senses guided them along hidden causeways, while Alara's wards kept the noxious vapors at bay. At night, campfires glowed between the marsh's crimson reeds, and Kaalara stood watch, her silhouette a dark sentinel against plumes of steam. Alara joined her just before dawn, and together they watched the first light chase shadows across the marsh, tempering its unnatural glow. Emerging from the Ember Marsh, they beheld Blackspire's spire, its blackened pinnacle looming like a claw reaching for the heavens. The city below lay in ruins, streets choked with ash and bone, its towers jagged stumps silhouetted against a blood-red sky. From the apex of the Void Forge, a pall of darkness pulsed, breathing despair into every corner. The expedition halted at the city's edge. Alara dismounted, boots crunching on ash. "This is our crucible," he murmured. Kalara's gaze hardened with resolve. "Then let us temper the rift with our bond." They infiltrated the city through ancient catacombs, passages lined with bones that whispered the prayers of the dead. Kalara's claws carved a swift path ahead. Alara's wards, flaring to reveal hidden traps and collapsing walls. Each step took them closer to the heart of the Void Forge, but also deeper into danger, as the air itself seemed to coalesce into shadowy phantoms that lunged from every corner. The expedition's mages formed a protective ring, chanting spells of banishment, while the engineers set runic charges at structural weak points. In the forge's central chamber, they found the Void Rift, a roiling maw of inky darkness, suspended above a dais of twisted metal. Tendrils of shadow snaked forth, ensnaring hapless soldiers and dragging them screaming into oblivion. Kalara and Alara charged in unison. She cleaved the nearest tendril with star-forged steel, while he unleashed the combined shards of the celestial chorus, runes of binding light that sizzled through the void spawn ranks. The engineers detonated their charges, collapsing pillars of obsidian crystal that choked the rift's edges, but the abyss resisted, pulsing stronger. Realizing brute force alone would not quell the tear, Kalara leapt onto the dais and pressed, her gauntlet etched with every rune of her people against the rift's edge. Alara followed, channeling his healing song mist to counteract the rift's corrosive energy. Together, they wove a counter-harmony of starlight and compassion that resonated within the abyss. The Void Forge trembled as its dark music clashed with their symphony, and for a moment time itself stuttered. With a final synchronized chord, a roaring blend of Kailara's purring chant and Alara's resonant hymn, the rift collapsed inward, imploding in a blinding flash that shook the city's very foundations. Shadows screamed as they were drawn back into the void, and the pall lifted from the sky, revealing dawn's golden rays for the first time in countless seasons. The Void Forge's twisted gears melted into harmless ash, and the city's ruins stood silent, witness to the power of unity over oblivion. When the light faded, Kalara and Alara staggered back, breathless and spent atop the shattered dais. Around them, the surviving expedition members knelt in awe, their wounds sealed by the afterglow of the battle. Kalara's fur was singed, and Alara's armor scored, but their eyes met with unspoken triumph. "The rift is sealed," she announced, voice quivering with relief. Alara drew her into an embrace, his arms a sanctuary amid the razed city. "And the void spawn's reign is ended," he whispered. As they led the expedition home through Black Spire's empty streets, the first seeds of renewal took root. Moss sprouted in cracks of obsidian walkways, and from the forge's molten embers rose delicate flowers of starlight. Kailara and Alara rode in silent reverence through the transformed ruins, each step echoing with promise. By the time they emerged into open fields, the sky above was clear, and the world, scarred yet unbroken, stretched before them, ready for the healing to begin. Their return to the citadel was heralded by banners of victory streaming through. The gates, the streets alive with cheers and tears of relief. Citizens lined the thoroughfares, reaching out to touch the armored hooves. Approaching the Star Reef, they beheld its luminescent spires swirling with inky tendrils, void corruption, twisting the natural currents into malevolent patterns. Ships caught in the currents were shredded before reaching safety. Kailara raised her blade of stardust light and led the vanguard launch crafts, slicing through tendrils to create safe corridors. Alara coordinated from the bridge, directing mages to weave protective wards around each vessel. Under their guidance, refugees and traders escaped the reef's grasp, their grateful cheers echoing across the void. In the reef's heart, they discovered a nascent void locus, an embryonic tear yearning to bloom into darkness. The engineers prepared calibration spells while Kailara and Alara stood ready to fend off the void spawn guardians. The locus pulsed, as if alive, and from its depths emerged shades of shadow that lunged forward with feral hunger. Kailara moved like a whirlwind of light, each strike melting shadows into motes of harmless nothingness. Alara stood firm at her side, his gauntlet flaring with binding runes that sealed fissures in space-time. As the final shade dissolved, the locust trembled before them, its darkness wavering. Kailara approached and placed her blade's tip against its core. Alara channeled the chorus's chords through his voice in a low, resonant hymn. The blade glowed with every shard of harmony they had reclaimed, and together they plunged it into the locus. A wave of pure starlight surged outward, extinguishing the embryonic rift before it could take root. The reef's spires calmed, their luminescence restored to natural beauty. Triumph once more rang through the crew of Aurora's Grace, but Kailara and Alara shared a quiet moment at the observation deck. Stars glittered without the pall of void threat, and the gentle hum of the ship's engines was a lullaby after so many battles. She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the peace. "We compose new verses," she whispered. "For every shadow we banish, a new light is born." He kissed her temple, the warmth of his presence a promise of many dawns to come. Their homecoming was quieter this time, no grand procession, only the steady beacons of the lighthouse citadel guiding them back. Yet those beacons meant more than ever, symbols of vigilance and hope lighting the path for all travelers. Kailara and Alara disembarked hand in hand, greeted by the council's envoy with respectful bows. In the plaza, citizens had erected a new monument, twin statues of the queen and her champion, carved in moonstone and silver, standing united against a carved void spire. At the statue's unveiling, Kailara addressed the gathered multitude. "Let this stand as a reminder that we do not conquer darkness by war alone," she proclaimed, "but by binding our spirits in compassion and courage." Alara stood beside her, raising his sword whose blade shimmered with the chorus's light. "And that mad love, wielded wisely, can protect a world," he added. The crowd erupted in cheers, a chorus of voices uniting in triumph. Under the starlit sky that night, Kailara and Alara returned to the Mirror of Souls in the royal gardens. Together they gazed into its depths and saw not two figures but a single silhouette, a queen and commander merged in purpose. "Our song endures," Alara said softly. She took his hand, voice as steady as the stars. "And so shall our legacy." As seasons turned, the Citadel Academy trained new guardians in the ways of harmony, instilling in them the lessons of madness tempered by mercy. Alara oversaw their rites, her fierce presence now balanced by maternal care. Alara taught them the art of compassionate command, his gentleness teaching strength. Under their joint tutelage, the next generation rose, song-wielders and rune-bound, guardians ready to stand as bulwarks against any darkness. Decades later, on the anniversary of the First Covenant, Alara and Alara stood before the Academy's highest tower, now grown into a living beacon of starlight. The halls echoed with the music of apprentices practicing their harmonies and the hum of enchanted runes sustaining the structure. They shared a quiet smile, knowing they had woven a legacy stronger than any rift. Turning toward each other, Alara gently brushed a silver-streaked lock of fur from Alara's brow. Her touch, both queenly and intimate. "Our song has echoed across the galaxy," she mused, violet eyes alight. He cupped her cheek, voice low with love. "And it will echo forever." The twin statues in the plaza, bathed in starlight, seemed to nod in agreement. Beneath the watchful glow of the twin moons, they walked hand in hand toward the Citadel's gates, symbols of a world reborn. Behind them, the battlements bore no scars of war, only banners of harmony fluttering in peaceful breeze. Ahead lay unknown horizons, ripe with possibility and song, and as they stepped into that future together, the world exhaled in hope, for the Mad Queen and her chosen champion had shown that unity, born of compassion and courage, could weave the brightest melodies from the deepest darkness.